Welcome to day 8 of our final exam review unit. Today we're going to be focusing on solving quadratics using the quadratic formula and completing the square. So our goal for today, given an unfactorable quadratic, you will be able to find the roots by using the quadratic formula or by using what we call completing the square. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to focus first on using the quadratic formula. All right, so here we have our quadratic formula. So if you're going to use it, you have to make sure that first you have to have it equal to 0. So just like when we did yesterday, it has to be equal to 0. So when you cannot factor your quadratic, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, then you can use the quadratic formula. Now this formula will be given to you on your reference sheet on the final exam, but you have to know to look it up. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now the a, the b, and the c come right from your equation, a, b, and c. Now one thing to note, this part right here underneath the square root symbol, this must be positive. You can't take the square root of a negative number. So if you get a negative under there, you have to go back and take a look at it, because if it's not positive, that means there's going to be no real solutions. So it must be positive. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look here. So solve using the quadratic equation. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that it's equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 6x. Right, and now we get x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 0. So now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to set this up using our a, our b, and our c. So let's go ahead. So here our a value, the number in front here is a 1. Our b is equal to negative 6, and our c value is equal to 7. So those are the values that we're going to use. Now we're going to go ahead and plug it into our quadratic equation. So it's x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Remember, when you substitute in, you put it in parentheses, minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, which is 1. Okay, let's go ahead and let's simplify this. So we're going to end up simplifying. So x equals negative 6 becomes just a positive 6 plus or minus the square root. Now I'm going to take what's underneath here and I'm going to plug it in my calculator to get what goes underneath the square root symbol. So in parentheses I go negative 6 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses 7. And we hit enter. And we get 8. So 8's going to go underneath the radical. And this whole thing is over 2 times 1 is 2. All right. Now we have to try to simplify this. So I see this is a radical 8. Now radical 8, we can simplify that. So I'm going to go off to the side. Here's my little think bubble. And we're going to think radical 8. Okay, this is going to break down and it's going to become 4 times 2. The square root of 4 is 2 radical 2. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that. So 6 plus or minus 2 radical 2 all over 2. Now I see 6, 2, and there's a 2 on the bottom, which means we can simplify. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 2 goes into 2 once. So my final answer is here is 3 plus 1 radical 2, and x equals 3 minus 1 radical 2. And we have our final answers. All right, let's go ahead and let's try another one. All right, we're going to actually cross off number 3 here. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and take number 2. Now if we take a look here, it's already equal to 0, so that means I can find my a, my b, and my c rather easily. So a, b, and c. So let's fill it in. So 3 would be my a, 7 would be my b, and 2 will be my c. So now we're going to plug it into our equation. So x equals negative b, which is 7. Remember, when we substitute it in, we put it in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is going to be 7 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 2, all over 2 times a, which is 3. All right, so let's go ahead now and let's see if we can simplify that. So we're going to end up with x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root. Now I'm going to let my calculator do the work for that. So I'm going to come here, parentheses 7 parentheses squared, minus 4 parentheses 3 parentheses 2. And we get 25. All over 6. All right, well, what do you notice about 25? Yep, it's a perfect square. So this whole thing is actually going to become, the square root of 25 is 5. So if I take a look, my first answer is negative 7 plus 5 all over 6. But if everything's a whole number, that means we can combine it. So negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2 in my numerator, 6 in the denominator, and that reduces to negative 1/3. So my first answer is negative 1/3. My second answer, negative 7 minus 5 all over 6. Again, they're all whole numbers, so we can combine our numerator. So we get negative 12 all over 6, which gives us negative 2. So my final answers here, I'm going to get a negative 1/3, comma, and a negative 2. And we have our two solutions. All right, so that's how we solve using the quadratic equation. All right, next up we're going to flip to the back. And now we're going to review how to solve using completing the square. All right, so steps for completing the square. Okay, you have to make sure your a coefficient is equal to 1. Okay, if it's not 1, then you're going to divide everything by your a value. All right, transform the equation so that c, the constant, is alone on one side. Now take half of the linear coefficient and square it, add that to both sides. All right, rewrite the left side as a perfect square and solve the equation, simplify. All right, we're going to work together through a few of these. So let's go ahead. Number 1, our a value is 1. Now we're going to transform it by adding the coefficient to the other side. So we want that to cancel. Now when we rewrite this, we're going to write x squared minus 6x. Now where that negative 1 was, now we're going to put a square equals 1. Now if we add a square to one side, we have to add a square to the other side. Now we have to think, what am I going to put inside of that square? When this is where we're going to take that linear coefficient, the middle term, negative 6, and we're going to divide it by 2. When you divide by 2, you're going to get negative 3, and we're going to take that negative 3 and we're going to square it, and we get 9. So we're going to put a 9 in the square. Now we're going to go ahead and factor this side. So it's 3 terms. We're going to trinomial factor. So this is x minus 3 and x minus 3 equals 10. Now instead of writing this twice, I'm going to write it once, and I'm going to square it, equals 10. Now I want to get rid of that square, so I'm going to square root both sides. So x minus 3 equals, now remember, whenever you take the square root of something, that's actually a positive or a negative radical 10. Now I have to solve for x, so now I'm going to add the 3 to the other side. X equals 3. Now we can't combine the 3 and the radical because they're not like terms, so we just write 3 plus or minus radical 10. And that's your final answer. If you want to write this out as two solutions, you can write x equals 3 plus radical 10 and x equals 3 minus radical 10. And there you have it. We've solved by completing the square. All right, let's try this just a few more times. So let's take a look now at number 2. So your a value is 1, so that means now all we have to do is add the 50 to the other side. All right, when we rewrite this, where the 50 once was, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a square. Oops. And then this should be an equal sign. And we're going to go 50 plus your square. All right, now we need to figure out what's going to go in that square. So I'm going to take this middle number. So 10 divided by 2, we get 5. 5 squared equals 25. So we're going to put a 25 in the square. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to factor this out. So when we factor that, we're going to get x plus 5 and x plus 5. How handy-dandy is it that these are both 5? And what did you get over here when you divided by 2? We got a 5. All right, equals, we add those and we get 75. So instead of writing this twice, I'm going to write it once. X plus 5 squared equals 75. Now we take the square root of both sides. So x plus 5 equals positive or negative radical 75. And then we can subtract 5 to the other side. So x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus radical 75. All right, but we're going to pause right here because we know how to simplify radicals, and we now have a 75. Now radical 75 is actually 25 times 3. 3 is a perfect, or 25 is your perfect square, so we can cross it off and put a 5 on the outside. So our answer is actually x equals negative 5 plus or minus 5 radical 3. So if you can, you want to simplify the radical. And now we have our two solutions. All right, one more to go. Let's take a look. Why don't you go ahead now, pause the video, and let's see if you can actually do this one on your own. So go ahead, give it a pause. All right, I'm going to pick up right here. So let's see, did you get to the step where you had x minus 3 squared equals 20? All right, if you did, let's go ahead then, take the square root of both sides. X minus 3 equals positive or negative radical 20. Then we add 3 to the other side. So x is equal to 3 plus or minus radical 20. All right, but we're not done yet. Radical 20, we can simplify that. So think of a perfect square that goes into 20. That's right, it's 4 times 5. We take the square root of 4, we get 2, and that goes to the outside. So our final answer here is x equals 3 plus or minus 2 radical 5. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our goal for today was to solve quadratics using the quadratic formula or completing the square. We'll be practicing that more in class tomorrow.